Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and in today's video what we're going to be doing is this right here. So if that looks exciting to you guys, please carry on and watch the video. Oh, and just one more thing before we go. Please consider like, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoyed the video. But now with all that out of the way, let's carry on with the video. Okay, so starting off with Thavius Kreeg here, all I've done is given a zenithal highlight prime before we get started painting with our contrast paint, which is going to be plaguebearer flesh. And this is going to really take full advantage and effect of that zenithal highlight, which is starting with our black base coat prime, then a little bit of a spray of white over top or a lighter color. And since we're using our contrast paint, it's really going to bring out all the depth and shadows in here really nicely, especially once this dries. It's going to look really good. And it's going to really help give us all the added depth of going into shadows and highlights with only having to apply one coat. So it's quite effective, especially with the contrast paints and how they do that sort of thing. And I'm just sort of figuring that stuff out now, and I'm really quite enjoying contrast paints. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is moving on with another contrast paint, and this is going to be shyish purple. And we're going to be using this for Thavius Kreeg's cloak. Now, I am deviating a little bit from the box art of, or what his canon sort of appearance is in Descent into Avernus, because I've found that his style of clothing and everything is very much just brown on brown on brown, and I wanted to mix it up a little, so I'm deviating from the actual official artwork here. I want to go with something a bit more interesting than that, so hopefully this will be helpful for you guys if you want to make it a little bit more interesting as well. But like I said, we're doing the exact same technique as we just did before with our shyish purple. Okay, so once that's all dry, what we're going to be doing now is moving on to the underneath vest / coat that he's got on, and we're going to be using cavalry brown for that. So it's going to be a nice reddy brown. It's going to really help stand out amongst that dark purple and green we've got on there, so it's going to be really good at popping out that color. And like I said before, I'm going with different style of Thavius Kreeg. I wanted something a bit more interesting. And also one thing too to remember when you're using ordinary paints with contrast paints, be careful and precise where you want to be, because if you're accidentally going over any areas with ordinary paint, it can be very hard to clean it up with contrast paint. So just be aware of that if you're using the contrast method like I am here as well. Then once we have his undercoat done, we're going to come in now with some khaki. I'm going to be using this for the sort of dress he's wearing, I'm guessing. Sort of just the underneath clothes anyway, the very underneath part. And khaki is also another bright colour, which is going to help bounce off these other colours we've got here. So it's just a matter of coming in, being careful, like I said again, with our contrast paints. We want to be careful of spilling anything over there. Not so bad if we spill it in the area we just did with our cavalry brown, because it's easy enough to touch up those areas. But it's just a matter of getting in there. As you can see, switch to a finer tip brush if you need to get really close into those areas, and it's just about being neat. Then once we have that area painted up, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to come in with some deck tan. And we're going to be using this for the sort of fur collar he's got going around his neck. So being very careful here again, like we said, because of our contrast painting that. As well as that, it's a very small area with really intricate details. It's quite nicely sculpted with all that fur around his collar there. Now you can switch this out with any color. You might want to go with a nice brown fur collar, black. I'm just going with something to help contrast it against the other colors we've got on here as well. Then once we have that fur collar painted up, we're going to come in now with some grey-black. And what we're going to be doing with our grey-black is we're going to be using it to be painting Thavius's facial hair as well as his ordinary hair as well. Now, maybe a little bit hard to see on camera, but he does have like a little moustache and a goatee. So switch to a very fine point brush if you're afraid of this. And as you can see, I'm just really carefully just scraping it along the top, sort of catching it with the edge of the tip of my brush rather than the actual tip of my brush. Have a little bit more control, especially with little things like that you just want to brush along the top of. And of course with that, we also want to do Thavius's hair as well. So remember again, this is a nice textured area, so make sure you get in between all those little areas of the fibers of the hair. Then once we have that hair complete, we're going to come in now with some hammered copper. And we're going to be using this, of course, for Thavius's nice staff he's got in his hands. Now, there's a variety of different tones and colors you could go with here. You might want to go with a nice gold or a silver one here. The reason why I'm going with copper is I'm going to be adding on a sort of, what do you call it, oxidation effect, and really give it that nice blue oxidation look and really help add in another color to the piece, give it that nice, more visual, interesting look on the piece itself. Then once we've completed that, we're going to come in now with some royal purple. And what we're going to be doing for our royal purple is we're going to be using it for highlighting our shyish purple on our cloak that we have here. And since it's such a big jump up in color, it's going to really help add the effect of these really bright, vibrant highlights. I'm just trying out some different techniques and adding in some brighter highlights there, really pushing up the contrast in the colors, just seeing how it turns out and seeing if it makes it look a lot more visual interesting, since this model is sort of plain. It's just, you know, our devil man sort of just sitting there. So I wanted to spruce it up a little bit and see how far I can push some of these effects and stuff that I'm learning. Then once we've picked out all those highlighted areas, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some agrax earthshade. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying this wash, but only in some selected areas. Pretty much I'm only going to be doing it focusing on his underclothes. So we want to be doing with that nice sort of underneath shirt / vest there, and his skirt as well. As well as that, I also want to do the fur around his collar, and it was being very, very careful. I don't want any of the wash to go over any of that contrast paint. It'll tint the contrast paint and give a different result. So I want to avoid that, and so do you if you want to be copying what I do here. So just keep that in mind when you're doing the washing stages. Just be very careful where you're applying it, making sure it doesn't pull up in the places you don't want it to. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to come in with some reikland fleshshade. And we're going to be using this for applying over top of our staff that Thavius is holding here. Just giving it sort of a more reddish tint. I could have gone with the black hair and just really darkened it down, but I want to give it that more sort of warm tone to really help push it a little bit, as it's a completely different item. So that's why I'm coming with the reikland fleshshade here. As well as that, I'm also going to be using it on the fur trim he has around his collar, just to give a different color. And like I said, you can either go with the agrax earthshade here or the reikland fleshshade. I just wanted to switch it up a little bit, so that's why I'm going with the reikland fleshshade here. Then with that complete, what we're going to do now is coming back in with our khaki here, and we're going to be using this, of course, for our highlighting step. Now, this is going to be nice and tricky since there's only very little raised details here on the piece. I mean, you can pick them out, as you can see here. You can see I've gotten a nice finer tip brush, and I'm just very carefully going on these areas, because there's also some flatter areas, especially when you get closer to that middle of his stomach there. So just be aware as you're going along, just picking out the areas that look nice, seeing where you can see those ridges where that wash is settled into. You can go right next to that to really pick out the higher points on the miniature. Then once we've picked out those highlights, we're going to come in now with some more highlights, and this is coming back to our original cavalry brown. And of course this is for our undershirt that our Thavius is wearing here. Really, as you can see, there's some nice, really defined high points in this miniature, especially when it comes close to that chest, as that clothing is just sort of stretching around his belly. So there's some nice, good, obvious areas where we want to pick out those highlights. And of course we want to hit the ridges of the collar, and just places like that, being very careful with our brush placement, and more using the side of the brush than the actual tip, so we can get a better coverage and we can really brush it across and really get that highlight in one smooth stroke. Then with those highlights done, what we're going to be doing now is coming in with some deck tan, and this is going to be used in a dry brushing fashion, of course, and that is just to be picking out our fur collar trim that we have around here. So you can see I've got a really old brush that I'm using for this. It's a little bit smaller than most of my dry brushes, so don't be afraid to use up a beat up old brush that you've got. It's got a finer tip if you need to get into smaller places to dry brush. Didn't have a dry brush this small, so I do have this nice old brush that can double as a dry brush for now, especially for things like this where it's harder to get in those wider bristled brushes for the dry brushing steps. Then once we have that complete, what we're going to do now is coming back in with some brassy brass, and this is of course for our highlight for our staff now. And like I said, we came over with a red wash with our reikland fleshshade to give it that more reddish tinge, and you can see by just adding the brass back in, we've got that nice bright shining effect pretty much straight away, and it's really helping separate it out and giving it that warmer tone that we were after. So it's just a matter of going around, picking out all the high points on the staff he's wielding there, and just spending time to making sure that you catch all those edges. Then once you have that complete, we're going to come on with one last step. Like I said, we're going to come on some nihilakh oxide, because we want to oxidize up that staff that Thavius is wielding to give him that nice blue oxidation color, and really add in another eye-popping visual piece to the miniature, especially from a distance. It's going to really help add in a awesome effect as well. So it's just a matter of going around, picking out some recessed sort of spots, really getting it in there, waiting for it to dry up, and touching it up as you need to with our highlights, so it's not too distracting, but it's going to be in there, and it's going to really give off a nice effect, especially at the end, giving that really bright blue, giving another place to look at on the miniature overall. And with all that complete, we have now finally finished painting up Thavius Kreeg from the Dungeons & Dragons miniature range by Gale Force 9. So I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, whether you want to follow along and do what I did here and add in those changes to Thavius, or you just want to use this as inspiration for painting up your own miniatures. With all that said, guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video.